All right, good people, welcome to week 5. All right, we're going to get in a little bit into chapter 20, and wish I could be there, but you are well taken care of with Professor Fennessy. So let's get into it. All right. So basically, the 20s is really kind of seen as a kind of decade of prosperity, right? That comes to a screeching halt, of course, uh, in 1929 with the Great Depression. All right. Following the First World War, there was a recession, and then after that slight recession, the 20s took off, and you had a tremendous growth in just almost every industry. Economic expansion and partnership between business and government and business values seem to be really high in the 1920s, almost higher than any other period, right? After the post war recession receded in 1920, the decade was one of extraordinary prosperity. We have productivity and output skyrocketing as new industries such as chemicals, electronics grew, and older industries adopted the Ford's moving assembly line. I think I talked about this last week, of course. The Fordist model of production. This is when it comes into existence, and the assembly line really revolutionizes production. Automobiles so stimulated economic growth that auto factories, not iron and steel mills, came to embody U.S. industrial power. Again, I want you to think back to the conversation about how, at the turn of the century, we see the United States emerging as a major empire, all right, and seeing itself as that. And the language of American brawn and American industrial power is sort of pretty ubiquitous at this particular time. All right. Car production tripled in the decade. General Motors surpassed Ford, and by 1929, half of U.S. families own cars. The auto industry sparked the growth of steel, rubber, oil production, road construction, and other economic sectors, and promoted tourism and the expansion of suburbs. So, again, people are moving out of cities and into suburban space. All right. And we're primarily talking about white Americans at this particular time. African Americans are still slowly migrating from the South to U.S. cities, but for the most part, this suburbanization would be something that would really pick up later in the decade. In this decade, America's multinational corporations also extended their penetration of international markets. Again, part of this imperial expansion that we see in the late 19th century. The dollar became the most important currency in world trade, and American industry continued to lead other nations in output. In the 20s, for the first time, consumer goods became attainable by most Americans, and goods made available by credit and installment buying plans such as vacuum cleaners, telephones, washing machines, refrigerators. These things all transform daily life. Just imagine if you didn't have any of those things today, right? Advertising and marketing professionals found new ways to compel Americans to purchase items from the new industrial cornucopia. All right. Americans spent a good amount, more time, more leisure activity. They went on vacations. Sports and movies became a real feature. Radios and phonographs brought mass entertainment and private homes and birthed a new kind of celebrity culture. Now, again, this is all evolving very unevenly. When we begin to control for race and class, everyone is not experiencing this prosperity in the same ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that moving forward in chapters that are ahead. But just want to really emphasize that things are not evolving and developing evenly. All right, the class cleavages in the society are widening and become very acute, particularly when the depression hits in 29. All right. Um, a French visitor, André Siegfried, wrote in 1928 that a new society had emerged in which Americans valued their standard of living above all else. I mean, you probably hear that a lot, the United States sort of um, talking about itself in terms of the standard of living that it's been able provide for its citizens. All right. Well, this is where we really begin to see the idea of the standard of living become this kind of sacred pronouncement. Right. Americans' willingness to amass enormous debts in order to purchase consumer goods seem to replace 19th century values of thrift and self-denial. Just think about that today. Let's think about where we are today in terms of consumption and purchasing and the kind of, being in social media and the kind of hyper commercialization and hyper advertisements that we're all exposed to, right? Well, we begin to see a lot of this in the 20s as the kind of classic U.S. consumer is being produced and created and shaped. All right. So, work, once seen as a point of pride and skill or collective empowerment in trade unions, now seem only a means to pursue individual fulfillment through consumption and entertainment. All right. So, this is what the good old roaring 20s started to look like. Okay. All right. Let us continue forward. All right. I want to kind of begin with Sacco and Vanzetti. This was a critical and very important case that would emerge later, and I want you're going to be able to read about this in your textbook, but I want you to pay attention to it, this image, and we'll probably circle back to it moving forward. All right, household appliances. You see this rise. You see this between 1900 and 1930. You see vacuum cleaners and refrigerators and washing machines and electricity, and you see all this sort of technological change that contributes to the domestic front. All right. Now, despite the abundance of mass consumer society, the fruits of economic expansion were very unequally distributed. Okay. Again, I want to emphasize that again, very unequally distributed. Real wages rose by 1/4 between 1922 and 1929, but corporate profits rose at more than twice this rate, and economic concentration continued with a smaller number of firms and banks controlling greater shares of industry and finance. Wow, what does that make you think about? If you think about the current moment, when you think about high concentrations of wealth, right? The ways in which we talk about billionaires, right? Being a billionaire, and how that factors into the public consciousness and sort of speaks to contemporary values, right? We talk about, we hear it a lot. All right. So there's a lot of wealth being created, but it's concentrated. All right. So in the early 1929, the share of national income of the wealthiest 5% of American families exceeded that of the bottom 60%. The majority of families had no savings, and 40% of Americans lived in poverty, unable to enjoy the new consumer economy. I want to repeat that. 60%, the majority of families had no savings, and 40% of Americans lived in poverty. That's almost half the country still lived in poverty, unable to enjoy the new consumer economy. All right. Improved productivity allowed goods to be made with fewer workers. And while employment grew in some sectors, such as retail and education, manufacturing employment dropped significantly for the first time in U.S. history. Deindustrialization began in the old industrial Northeast as businesses moved south to take advantage of cheaper and non-union labor. Farmers were also excluded from prosperity. American agriculture had reached its zenith in World War I, and then Europe's need for food and government policies had kept farm prices extremely high. But increasing mechanization and the use of fertilizer and pesticides elevated output even as world demand stagnated, steadily reducing farm incomes and compelling tens of thousands of farm foreclosures. In the 1920s, for the first time in U.S. history, the number of farms and farmers declined. Extractive industries such as mining and lumber also suffered from overproduction in the world market. Even before the 1930s, rural America was suffering from economic depression. Right? The decade of the 20s, however, was not simply a period of decline, but also one of significant technological change. The mechanization of agriculture accelerated dramatically new inventions like the steam tractor and the disc plow encouraged increase in scale in the scale of agriculture. Excuse me. This increase demanded a workforce, and the far west's impoverished labor force was mainly supplied by Mexicans. On the Great Plains, extensive plowing and ignoring the environmental risks set the stage for the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Okay, so again, real interesting developments that precede and give shape to how we get to the Great Depression. All right. All right, here's an interesting image of potato growers. Check that out. All right, disc plows. Some more images. All right. The image of business, the decline of labor. I want you to pay close attention to this. Corporations and welfare capitalism. You'll see a lot of parallels with our current moment. And I want you to think about those parallels. We'll have a conversation about this when I return. I like to get into a conversation and talk about how you see the present reflected in the past. All right. So although high employment crippled much of Europe in the 1920s, America's high wages, efficient industry, and mass consumption projected a magical image of American wealth and permanent prosperity across the world. The Committee on Public Information's propaganda campaigns during World War I persuaded advertisers that it was possible to sway the minds of whole populations, and many businesses established public relations departments to defend corporate practices and win over a distrusting public. They successfully changed public attitudes towards Wall Street. Congressional hearings from 1912 to 1914 held by the Representative Arsene Pujo of Louisiana had exposed the big Wall Street banks' manipulation of stock prices. Wow, imagine that, Wall Street manipulating stock prices. And strengthened popular views that investors were fleeced in the stock market. By the 1920s, however, with stock prices rising, the market gained more investors, and by 1928, 1.5 million Americans owned stock, more than in any period in time in U.S. history. Now, with the defeat of the 1919 labor revolt and the dissolution of wartime regulations, business used the language of Americanism and industrial freedom against unions. Here again, this struggle and this fight against unions, union busting. Some corporations of the 1920s adopted new styles of management called welfare capitalism, in which they offered employees private pensions, medical insurance plans, job security, and leisure programs. These businesses celebrated their attention in the human factor in industry. But more employers adopted the American plan, whose basis was the open shop, a workplace free of government regulation and unions, except in some cases company unions that were created and controlled by management. They believed collective bargaining infringed on the liberties of management and argued that prosperity depended on providing complete freedom to business. Public relations campaigns linked unionism with socialism and sinister foreigners, and even the most forward-looking companies hired strikebreakers, right, and detectives and blacklisted union members to prevent or defeat unions and strikes. In this hostile environment, unions lost more than 2 million members and capitulated to employer demands in order to prevent their annihilation. All right. All right, so what we're going to do is I want to jump through a few things here. I don't want to spend too much time going through the entire chapter. A lot of this, of course, you'll